porch light was still warm when I raised my hand to knock. A cardboard box had landed on my mat that evening. The wrong apartment number on the label, the unit right beside mine. So I carried it over, 6 short steps, and I knocked on my new neighbor's door. The woman who opened it was the ex I never forgot. She stood there in the soft glow of the hallway, one hand resting on the black-painted door, and she just smiled, like no time had passed at all. 12 years. And I forgot, in that single second, how to breathe. My name is Isaiah Denton. I'm 34 years old. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I work in cybersecurity, which is a polite way of saying I spend my days following the traces other people leave behind. Every break-in, every intrusion, every quiet little door somebody pried open when they thought no one was watching. That's the job. I read code for a living. I'm good at spotting the thing that doesn't belong. So it's funny, in the way that isn't funny at all, that it took me 12 years to miss the biggest anomaly of my life. Her. One wall away. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. I live alone in a quiet building on the north side of the city. 3rd floor, corner unit. The kind of place people call tidy because there's nothing in it worth mentioning. 1 couch, 1 coffee maker, a desk with 3 monitors that glow long after midnight. I moved in after the divorce, when what I needed most were walls that didn't remember anything. Her name was Tara. We were married for 5 years, and we split up 3 years ago. No kids. People always lower their voices when they ask about that. Like it's a wound, and maybe it was, but not the way they think. We simply wanted different lives. She wanted noise, and lights, and a bigger version of everything. I wanted quiet. In the end, quiet won, and it took the marriage with it. There's one thing I carried from apartment to apartment, through every move, through the marriage and out the other side of it. A key, a small brass key, worn smooth, tied to a length of red string gone soft and frayed at the ends. It doesn't open anything. It hasn't opened anything in over a decade. It belonged to a girl I loved when I was 20, back at North Carolina State. A girl named Camille who pressed it into my hand one autumn night and said, "So you always have a way in." I kept it the way you keep a scar, without deciding to, without knowing why, just because it had become part of the shape of me. We were together 2 years. Then, one spring, she was gone. Her mother got sick back home, and Camille left in a hurry. And after that there was only silence. No calls that connected. No answer. I told myself she'd chosen to disappear, that whatever we'd had mattered less to her than I'd believed. She probably told herself something just as cruel about me. That's the thing about silence. Everyone fills it with the worst story they can imagine. And then they move in and live there. I graduated. I built a career out of finding what's hidden. I married someone else and unmarried her. And through all of it, I kept a key that opened nothing. And I never once made myself ask why. Which brings me back to tonight. I'd been at my desk for hours, the server fans humming in my headphones, a cup of coffee going cold at my elbow, the red string looped around 2 of my fingers the way it always ends up when I'm thinking. Then my phone buzzed with a delivery, and there was a box on my mat that wasn't mine, addressed to the unit beside mine. New tenant. I'd heard someone moving in over the past week. Boxes in the hall, the scrape of furniture through the shared wall. I hadn't thought much about it. People come and go. So I picked up the box and I walked those 6 steps and I knocked, expecting a stranger. What I got instead was the one face I'd spent 12 years pretending I'd forgotten. She looked at me like she'd been expecting this exact moment. "Small world, huh?" she said. And she said it too easily, too smoothly, like a line she'd already rehearsed. I didn't hear it then. I was too busy trying to remember how to stand upright. But I would hear it later, replaying it 100 times, and I'd realize the truth had been sitting right there in her voice from the very first second. Camille Dorsey, my new neighbor. Of all the doors in all the city, she had ended up behind the one right next to mine. The first few weeks, we were careful with each other. The way you're careful with something you dropped once and can't stand to drop again. It started with small things. She'd knock on a Saturday morning to borrow something. A screwdriver, a stepladder, a spare phone charger. And every single time, it was something I actually had. Something that required me to come to her door and stand in the warm light of her apartment while she thanked me. I told myself she was just settling in. New place, no tools, That's normal. I didn't let myself notice that a woman who'd moved across a whole state with a fully stocked kitchen somehow never had the one thing she needed. She learned my schedule fast. Too fast. She'd catch me in the hallway right as I left for work, right as I came home, like the timing was luck. One morning she pressed a paper cup of coffee into my hand before I'd even said good morning. "You still take it black," she said, setting it down like it was nothing. I laughed. Lucky guess. She didn't answer. That was the tell I didn't read, because how would she guess? Black, no sugar, is not a guess. It's a memory. But I was 34 and tired and lonely in a way I never admitted to anyone. And when a woman like that remembers how you take your coffee, you don't interrogate it. You just let it be a small, warm thing in a cold week. I could hear her through the shared wall some nights. Not words, just the shape of a life. Water running, a kettle, the low murmur of a radio. For 3 years that wall had been the edge of my quiet. And now there was someone on the other side of it, and I'd catch myself lying awake, listening, aware of her the way you're aware of a light left on in the next room. She ran a bakery 2 blocks over, a little place called Wildflower, with a hand-painted sign and flour dust in the air that never quite settled. I started finding excuses to walk past it, then excuses to walk in. She'd slide something across the counter, a cardamom bun, a slice of pound cake, a cookie still warm from the tray. And it was always something I'd loved a decade ago. Foods I hadn't thought about in years. Tastes that belonged to a version of me she shouldn't still have had memorized. Once, I said something about it. "You've got a good memory," I told her, holding up the exact cake I used to buy her on Sundays back in college. "Some things stick," she said, and she looked at me for a half second too long. And then she turned back to the oven. "I want to be honest about something." Part of me knew. Somewhere underneath, in the same place that spots the packet that doesn't belong in the data stream, a quiet alarm was going off. "This is not coincidence," it said. "People don't remember this much by accident." But I turned the volume down, because the alternative, that she had chosen all of this, chosen me, on purpose, was a hope too big to hold without my hands shaking. So I told myself it was chance. I told myself we were just 2 people who used to know each other, being neighborly. Anyone watching my life from the outside would have seen the truth long before I let myself. What I keep coming back to is how easy it was. How natural. With Tara, everything had been effort. A constant low negotiation over whose life we were actually going to live. Who was going to be disappointed this time. With Camille, there was no negotiation at all. There was just a door 6 steps from mine, and a light in the hallway, and a woman who somehow already knew the man I'd been before the world got its hands on me. I had forgotten that being known could feel like rest instead of surveillance. I'd forgotten it could feel like walking into a room where nothing needed explaining, where I didn't have to translate myself into something easier to love. Then came the night that changed the shape of everything. It was almost 11 when she banged on my door. No warm cup this time. No easy smile. Her face gone pale under the hallway light. "Isaiah," she said, "something's wrong with the shop's computer. Everything's locked. There's a message asking for money." I knew what it was before I saw the screen. I'd cleaned up 100 of these for corporate clients who could afford it. Ransomware. Somebody had sent her a fake invoice. She'd clicked the link the way anyone would. And now every file she owned was scrambled behind a wall she couldn't climb. Her recipes. Her supplier list. 3 years of customer records. The numbers she used to make payroll. On the screen, a countdown timer and a demand. Pay or lose it all. Most people would have told her to call someone in the morning. But I didn't live in the morning kind of world. I sat down at her little back counter, in a bakery that smelled of yeast and cinnamon and fear, and I got to work. It took all night. I won't pretend it was elegant. I traced the intrusion back to the email, cut the machine off from the network, pulled what I could out of the shadow copies the attackers had missed, and started rebuilding her world 1 file at a time. She sat beside me the whole time, close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off her shoulder, watching my hands move across the keyboard. She never asked what I did for a living. She didn't have to. It was pouring out of me in every keystroke. The thing I was. The thing I was good at. Laid bare without a single word of bragging. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, she made us coffee on the little machine in back, and she set my cup down. Black. No sugar, And she watched me, the way you watch someone you used to know finally become the person they always promised they'd be. I felt her looking. I didn't look back. I was afraid of what my face might do. "You're really good at this," she said quietly. "I just find what doesn't belong," I said. "That's the whole job. Find the thing that snuck in and get it back out." She was quiet for a second. "And if you can't get it out," she asked, "if it's already too late?" "Then you learn to live with it," I said, not thinking. The red string was looped around my fingers again, and I felt her eyes drop to it, and something moved across her face that I didn't understand until much later. For hours it was just the two of us and the blue light of a laptop, her recipes surfacing one by one out of the wreckage like things pulled from a flood. Every file I recovered, she'd make a small sound, half relief and half disbelief, and lean in closer to be sure it was real. I'd forgotten what it felt like to fix something that actually mattered to a person sitting right beside me. Not a corporation, not a line item in a quarterly report. Her whole livelihood, her early mornings, the little world she'd built with her own two hands, handed back to her piece by piece before the sun came up. By sunrise, her files were back. Every recipe, every customer, the countdown gone, the demand deleted. Her whole small, beautiful life pulled back out of the dark. She cried a little and laughed at herself for crying. And I stood in the gray light with a dead cup of coffee and flour on my sleeves, and I realized I hadn't felt this useful, this seen, in years. I unlocked her files by sunrise. What I didn't notice, what I wouldn't let myself notice, was that somewhere in that long night, she had quietly unlocked something in me that I'd bolted shut a very long time ago. I walked back to my own door as the sun came up. 6 steps. I stood there with my keys in my hand and tangled in with them, the little brass one on its red string, useless as ever. And for the first time in 12 years, I let myself wonder what it would feel like if a key like that could open something again. I told myself I was just tired. I told myself a great many things that spring. The good thing about a quiet life is that you can hear something loud coming from a long way off. Tara came back into mine on a Tuesday. I hadn't spoken to my ex-wife in the better part of a year. The divorce had been final for 3 years, the paperwork long since filed, and I'd assumed we were done the way people are supposed to be done. But there she was, in the lobby of my building, in a coat that cost more than my monthly rent, wearing the smile she used to aim at people right before she talked them into something. "Isaiah," she said, like we were old friends, "we need to talk about the condo." There was no condo. We'd sold the place we bought together the year we split, divided the money, signed every last page. She knew that. I knew that. The condo was a doorway, and she was already halfway through it before I could decide whether to let her in. I should have said no, but 3 years of silence and a lifetime of being raised polite is a hard thing to override. So I let her come up, and I made a pot of coffee I didn't want to share, and I listened to her talk in circles about nothing until the real reason surfaced, the way it always did with her. She'd heard I seemed happy. That was the thing she couldn't stand. Somebody had mentioned it, a mutual friend, a neighbor, it didn't matter who, that I'd been seen around town actually smiling, and Tara had come to find out why. Because in her arithmetic, if I was happy, it had to be because of something she was missing out on, something she could still reach out and take back. And then Camille knocked. She had a plate in her hands. She was always bringing something. And she stopped in my doorway when she saw I wasn't alone, and I watched 2 women size each other up in the space of a single breath. Camille, quiet, flower still on her wrist, holding a plate of something warm. Tara, sharp and bright, and already reading the room like a hand of cards. "Oh," Tara said, drawing the word out slow. "And who's this?" I made an introduction that came out clumsy. "My neighbor, Camille, an old friend." Every word felt like it was underselling something, and Tara heard it. Of course she heard it. She'd spent 5 years learning the exact frequency of the things I didn't say. Camille set the plate down, said something gracious about letting us catch up, and left. But Tara had already caught the scent, and Tara had never once in her life left a thing alone after she smelled that it mattered to me. She started asking questions. Casual at first, then not. How long had Camille lived here? How well did I really know her? Where had she come from? And I answered honestly, because I had nothing to hide. And with every answer I watched something calculating sharpen behind my ex-wife's eyes. Then she pulled out her phone. She'd already looked. it turned out. Somewhere between the lobby and my living room, Tara had done what Tara did best. She'd gone digging. And what she'd found, or decided she'd found, she laid out on my coffee table like a winning hand. "Do you honestly think this is a coincidence?" she said. "She moved across an entire state. She rented the one apartment in this whole city that happens to share a wall with yours. She shows up with your coffee and your favorite cake and your college nickname, like she's been studying for a test. She didn't move here, Isaiah. She hunted you. I want to tell you I dismissed it. I want to tell you I laughed in her face and put her out. But the truth is uglier than that. The truth is that she said out loud the exact thing my own quiet alarm had been whispering for weeks. The thing I'd kept turning the volume down on because I was too afraid to hope. And hearing it in Tara's voice, sharp and mocking and certain, twisted it. In her mouth it didn't sound like devotion. It sounded like a trap. It sounded like being hunted. That's the cruelty of it. She took a thing that might have been the most beautiful truth of my life and she poured poison over it. And then she handed it back to me and dared me to drink. And I hated that it worked. I hated that after everything Tara had put me through, she could still walk into my living room and rearrange my certainty in under an hour. That's the thing nobody warns you about someone who once knew you completely. They keep the map of you long after they've stopped loving you, and they know precisely which wall to lean on to make the whole structure sway. She pushed on the oldest one I had, the belief that people leave, that warmth is a setup, that the moment you let yourself truly want something is the exact moment it gets taken away. I'd built a quiet, careful life specifically so I would never have to test that belief again. And in a single evening she had me testing it against the only person who had ever made me want to stop believing it in the first place. "Ask her," Tara said, standing, gathering her expensive coat. "Ask her why she picked the apartment next to yours. Go on. Ask her. And when she lies to you, remember that I'm the one who told you the truth." Then she left, and the smell of her perfume hung in the hallway long after the door closed. Sharp and chemical, the smell of something that doesn't belong. I didn't sleep. I sat with the red string wound so tight around my fingers that it left a mark in the skin. And I let the doubt do its work. Because doubt is patient, and it is thorough, and it does not care in the slightest what it destroys on its way through you. The next evening, I knocked on Camille's door. Not with a box this time. With a question. I asked her, just like Tara said. I asked her why. Why this building? Why this wall? Why the coffee and the cake and all of it? And I watched her face change, watched the easy warmth drain out of it, watched her understand exactly what was being asked, and exactly who had put the question in my mouth. She didn't deny it. That was the thing that broke something open in me. She didn't call me crazy, didn't laugh it off, didn't reach for an easy explanation. She just got very quiet and very still. And then she said the last thing on earth I expected. "I left you a letter, Isaiah. Back then, when my mother got sick and I had to go, I left you a letter, and I waited. I waited for you to use the key. A letter." I stood there in her doorway, and the floor seemed to tilt under me. I'd spent 12 years believing there had never been one. 12 years building an entire cathedral of abandonment on the foundation of a silence I was sure she'd chosen. And now she was standing in front of me, telling me that the silence had been full of words the whole time. Words I had never once seen. "What letter?" I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. "Camille, there was no letter. There was never any letter. I need you to understand what that word did to me. A letter. It meant the entire shape of my life had been built crooked, poured over a wrong belief, and I couldn't yet tell how far the crookedness ran." Camille told me everything, standing in her doorway, and then sitting at her little kitchen table when standing got to be too much. She'd written it the night before she left. Her mother had had a stroke. She'd had to drive home to Charlotte before dawn, and there had been no time for a proper goodbye. So she'd written it all down. Where she was going, her new number, the fact that the key still meant exactly what it had always meant, and that this time, all I had to do was choose to use it. And she'd left it with someone to give to me. "Who?" I asked. "Devin," she said. "Your roommate." He was the only person I could find that morning. Devin Pryor. My college roommate. The guy I'd shared a cramped 2-bedroom with for 2 years. The guy I'd drifted away from the way you drift from almost everyone from before. I hadn't thought about him in ages, but I still had a way to reach him. And standing in Camille's kitchen at 9 at night, I called him. He picked up on the fourth ring, surprised, warm, and I cut straight through the small talk because I couldn't carry it. I asked him if he remembered Camille, if he remembered the spring she left, if she'd ever handed him anything to pass along to me. The line went quiet for a moment. Then he said the words that rearranged 12 years of my life. "Yeah, man," he said, slow, like he was pulling it up from a long way back. "She gave me a letter for you. But I was moving out that same week, remember? I was already half gone, so I gave it to Tara to hand to you. She said she'd take care of it. She swore she would. I gave it to Tara." I stood in Camille's kitchen and felt the whole thing lock into place with a horrible, quiet precision. The exact kind of certainty I chase for a living, arriving all at once in the last place on earth I wanted to find it. Camille hadn't vanished. She hadn't chosen to disappear. She'd left me a map home, and the woman I would later marry had taken it and buried it. Because even then, before I ever noticed her, Tara had wanted me, and she'd been willing to erase the person standing in her way. And she didn't just keep us apart back then. She married me on top of it. For 5 years I had shared a life, a home, a bed with someone who had known the entire time exactly why the girl I couldn't forget had gone silent. Because she was the silence. She had built it with her own 2 hands. I didn't feel rage, not right away. That came later, in slow, cold waves. What I felt in that first moment was something stranger, almost like vertigo. The sensation of every landmark in my own history quietly sliding a few inches to the left. The breakup I had carried for a decade like a personal failure had not been a failure at all. The years of quietly believing I simply hadn't been enough for her had been built on nothing, on a letter that never crossed the last few feet into my hand. A whole decade of self-blame, undone by a single sentence from an old roommate on a cracked phone line. I told Camille what Devon said. I watched it land on her, watched 12 years of her own wrong story crack apart the same way mine had just done. Because she'd had a story too. She'd believed I got the letter and chose not to come. She'd believed I read her whole heart laid out on paper and decided it simply wasn't worth the drive south. All this time, each of us had been quietly forgiving the other for a betrayal that never once happened. "I didn't move here to trick you," she said, and her voice was shaking. "I need you to believe that." I told myself I moved for the shop, and that part is true. The lease was real. The timing was real. But that is not why I picked this building. I picked this building because I heard you were divorced and living here, and I was done. I was done pretending I'd stopped thinking about you. I didn't come to trap you, Isaiah. I came because I never stopped hoping, and there it was. The very thing Tara had tried to weaponize. She moved here on purpose. She chose you. She planned all of it. Was true. Every word of it was true. But the truth Tara had tried to use as a blade turned in her hand, because by dragging it into the light she had dragged her own far larger sin out into the open right beside it. "You didn't disappear," I said. I could barely force the words out. "All this time I thought you left me. You didn't disappear. Someone made sure I would believe you did." Camille reached across that little table, and she set something down between us. The red string. She had kept the twin of it all these years, a matching length gone soft and faded, the same way I had kept the key. She laid it down like a border being erased, like a line drawn between 2 people that neither of them had ever actually agreed to. So I made my choice. Not the careful one, not the safe one, the true one. I told her I had never forgotten her either. Not for a single year. Not through the marriage. Not through the divorce. Not through 1,000 ordinary mornings when I wound a red string around my fingers and pretended I didn't know exactly why. We didn't rush it. We'd already lost 12 years to speed. To the hurry of a mother's illness. To the quickness of a lie. To all the fast wrong stories we'd told ourselves in the dark. Whatever this was going to become, we were going to build it slowly, one honest brick at a time. It started with the small rituals. She left her porch light on in the evenings now. Not for deliveries, not by accident, but for me. A soft yellow square in the hallway that meant she was home, that meant come by if you want to. I always wanted to. I fixed the Wi-Fi at the bakery, hardened her whole little system so that no fake invoice would ever lock her out again. And then I found myself lingering there long after the work was done, sitting on a stool at the end of the counter while she closed up, the 2 of us talking the way we used to, like no time had passed and also like all of it had. Both things true at the same moment. She'd hand me a broom without asking, and I'd sweep the flour into the dustpan while she counted out the register. And neither of us would say much of anything, and it would somehow end up being one of the best hours of my whole week. That's how I knew it was real. It didn't need to be loud to be enough. It didn't need to be anything but true. Sunday mornings became ours. She'd bake before the sun came up, and I'd walk down to the shop while the streets were still empty and blue, and she'd pull something out of the oven and set it in front of me. Pound cake, cardamom, the old favorites, and I'd drink my coffee black and watch the light come up gold through the front windows. There's a particular kind of happiness that never announces itself. It just accumulates, quietly, in ordinary rooms, until one day you glance up and realize your entire life has rearranged itself around it while you weren't looking. I told her, finally, about the key. I carried this for 12 years, I said. I showed her the little brass thing on its frayed red string, the one that opened nothing, the one that had ridden along in my pocket through every move and every mistake and every empty apartment. I told her I'd never once let myself understand why I kept it, that I'd kept it the way you keep a door propped open in the very back of your heart for someone, even after you've convinced yourself they are never walking through it again. She held it in her palm and she got that look again, the one from the ransomware night. And this time I finally understood it. It was the look of someone watching a thing they had hoped for, quietly and without permission, begin to come true. We relearned each other slowly. In the ordinary hours, most stories skip right over. I found out she hummed when she frosted things and had no idea she was doing it. She found out I couldn't fall asleep until I'd checked the locks twice, a habit I couldn't explain and one she never once teased me for. We learned which subjects were still tender and which had healed over into scar. She'd catch me winding the red string around my fingers during a hard conversation, and she'd reach over and still my hand with hers. And somehow that did more than any speech ever could have. We weren't 22 anymore. We didn't want the version of love that burns bright and asks for nothing. We wanted the kind you tend, morning after morning, on purpose. The months went by. Spring turned into a long green summer, and the summer cooled into fall, and the fall gave way to the gray edge of another winter. We took it slowly through every season of it. There were hard conversations about Tara, about the years we'd lost, about how much of both our lives had been bent and shaped by one person's small, deliberate cruelty. There was anger some nights, real anger, the kind that needs somewhere to go. There was grief for the 12 years we would never get back, and no honest way around it. But underneath all of it, there was a steadiness I had never once had with anyone. The steadiness of two people who had already survived the very worst thing that could have happened to them, which was losing each other, and had come out the far side quietly determined never to do it again. Some evenings I'd sit on her side of the wall I had spent 3 lonely years pressed against, and I'd think about how close we had been the whole time and never known it. One wall, 6 steps, 12 years, and a single hidden letter standing between two people who had never actually stopped choosing each other. It should have made me bitter. Mostly it just made me careful with what we had. The way you're careful with anything you understand you very nearly didn't get to keep. I stopped taking the small nights for granted. The porch light, the Sunday bread, her voice, warm through a wall that no longer divided anything at all. I never heard from Tara after that spring. There was nothing left for her to take, and I think, in the end, she understood that. Some doors close on their own once there's nothing behind them worth reaching for. Almost a year after the night, I knocked on her door with a box in my hands. She knocked on mine. It was evening. The porch light was warm, the very same gold as that first night, and she was standing in my doorway now instead of the other way around. And she had something small closed inside her fist. She opened her hand. A key. Her key. The key to her apartment, the one just 6 steps from mine, and it was tied to a length of red string. New string this time, bright and soft, not yet frayed by anything at all. For 12 years I had carried a key that opened nothing, and that evening she pressed a new one into my palm, red string and all, and she folded my fingers closed around it. This time, she said, "You don't have to knock." I hesitated. I want to be honest about that, because it mattered. For one long second I hesitated, the new key warm against my skin, because taking it meant trusting again. It meant believing that this time the door would stay open, that this time no one would slip in and quietly steal the way back. Trust, it turns out, is the single hardest thing to rebuild. Harder than any system, harder than any broken life dragged back out of the dark. But I had spent 12 years learning exactly what it costs to let a door stay closed. So I closed my hand around her key, and I chose her back. I think about silence a lot now. I spend my whole working life inside it. The silence of a system that's been broken into. The quiet gap where something should be and simply isn't. The empty space a thief leaves behind him. My job is to find the thing that snuck in and get it back out. To trace the truth back through all the noise to the one moment where everything first went wrong. And I'm good at it. I have always been good at it. But the biggest truth of my life didn't live in any system I could scan. It lived in a hidden letter and a key I never had the courage to use. In a silence, one person built on purpose, and two people spent 12 years living inside, each of us filling it with the cruelest story we could imagine about the other. Here is what I know now that I didn't know then. Silence is not an ending. It only feels like one. A silence is just a door that no one has knocked on yet. And the whole time you're standing on your side of it, certain you've been forgotten, there may be someone on the other side, hoping just as hard that you'll finally raise your hand. She'd been standing on the other side of my door the whole time. I just had to be brave enough to knock. 12 years too late, and somehow, exactly on time. So let me ask you two things, and I mean them both. Would you have the courage to knock again on the door of the person you never quite forgot? And which do you think is crueler, an honest goodbye, or a silence that someone else built just to keep you apart? If this story moved you at all, leave a like, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and tell me in the comments which door in your own life is still waiting for someone to knock. I'll be reading everyone.